This is SeeUs.TV, featuring interviews with various guests as we discuss interesting topics and upcoming events. And also join us as we visit public and social gatherings throughout the Pacific Northwest when SeeUs.TV is out and about. Welcome to this episode of SeeUs.TV.
Aloha, I'm Napua, and I'm here at the Nisqually Elder Center. I'm here with the twin Kalama sisters. We have Zelda and Zelma, and otherwise known as Lee and Dubs. And I've asked them to meet with us today because we wanted to find out more about their father, Peter Kalama, who, and you folks are the grandchildren of John Kalama, yes, where the town was named after. And there's a lot of conflicting stories about that. So I'd really love to hear from you folks about what you remember of your father and if there's anything that you remember about your grandfather.
I want to know where the conflict comes in at. I have no problem with it.
Actually, it's about, there's been different, in my research, they have talked about where the name Kalama comes from. But the plaques and all the history says it has to do with John Kalama. But, you know, there's some people that says it's named after that, the pretty maiden, for an Indian name for a pretty maiden, and there's another one for the goose. So that's what I'm talking about, the conflict of, you know, where the names really came.
Well, as far as I know, it was the town Kalama was named after my grandfather, John, and there is a plaque there in that park next to the river that states this for that it was named after John Kalama.
There's a river that was named John Kalama and the city, and in fact, it's really interesting because the plaque is being renovated and spruced up for the big celebration in 175th anniversary in August.
Yeah, and we were always told, my father, that he was part Hawaiian because his father was Hawaiian, and so that makes us part Hawaiian. On my mother's side, she's Native American. My father is half Native American because he was born to Mary Martin, who was the wife of John Kalama.
Well, in finding out more about the Kalama family and the descendants of the family, it doesn't only just talk about what's happened today. The whole history has come from the John being born on the main island. Kula Maui is where it says that he was born, and he traveled over here when he was 16. He arrived here, and when he arrived here, he joined the Hudson Bay, and he was working because they had the contracts for 2 or 3 years at a time, and he kept renewing it. But your grandfather was very colorful in that he did quite a bit of different jobs. He had all kinds of different jobs, so he was quite talented, and he was one of the first ones that was paid as one of the Kanakas, who was paid almost equally to what the white man was paid in Fort Nisqually, which was, I thought that was, isn't that interesting?
Yes, okay.
So when I heard that, I went, wow, that was kind of a cool thing. So he ends up marrying Mary Martin, and of course, with traditionally what he had to do to win her hand in marriage was to provide all these blankets and all the things that goes with the traditions of having her hand in marriage.
It would be just like what the non-Indians today call dowry.
Exactly. And so she must have been really worth something because there was a number of blankets that he had to produce to have her name her hand in marriage. Now, he and Mary had 2 children, and one of them is Peter Kalama, and that is?
My father.
So with your father, what I'd like to find out is there's lots of colorful stories about him as well. Now, share with everyone where you folks fit in Peter's several wives.
Well, his first wife was from Warm Springs, Oregon, was Lily Pitt, and he had several children with her. His second wife was Josephine Skamink, and he had one child with her. Then his third wife was my mother, Alice Jackson, and they had 12 children together. Zelda and I are the youngest, and we were twins. We had there were 7 of us girls and 5 boys. We have one brother left who's 91 years old now, is Fred Kalama, and he lives in Queets. He's the oldest, and there's 3 of us left. Blanche Simmons, who's 85, and Zelda and I are 75. But he was a proud man. I was proud of him, but he was a very proud man. He worked as long as he could, even though he was much older than my mother, but being it was an arranged marriage, she had to marry him. At the time, she didn't want to, but in those days, you know, if your parents or grandparents had an arranged marriage, you married that person. But then she ended up loving him. They raised, like I say, 12 children together. He lived to be very old, and she helped him a lot because she was younger than him, to make a living. They used to go out and fish the river. They cut wood together and sold wood together to make a living. And then when he got too old and couldn't work anymore, then we had to go on public assistance. And that was something that people, you know, really didn't want to do, but we didn't have a choice because we were born back in the days of the Depression, and it was a hard time. The federal government, the BIA, helped somewhat, and they provided lumber, and our dad built us a house. They used to have a nurse that used to come out through, I guess it would be equivalent to Indian Health now, but she used to come out and dispense medicines to the people on the reservations. And them days we used to have to take cod liver oil, and it kept us healthy. We didn't like it, but one thing, it did keep us healthy. We weren't sick like the people nowadays that are easy to catch colds and catch the flu. We weren't like that. We were poor, but we were happy. We didn't know we were poor, but we were happy. And that was because of my mother and father and our brothers and sisters.
It's interesting because, you know, cod liver oil, talking about that today, they actually sell that in the health food stores, you know, and it's, you know what, it's an antioxidant. And so it helps to prevent any kinds of illnesses. So yeah, they were very smart right off from the very get-go. And then they also live from the fruits of the land.
We grew up, like Zelma said, we never starved. We always had food. Mom and Dad always had food for us. And we, like she said, we didn't know we were poor. We didn't have toys. We just did what we went from outside. It was a piece of wood or sticks or rocks. And we were happy. We, like she said, we didn't know we were poor. We were the only ones living in our area. We didn't have a lot of children to play with. And so we played by ourselves. And later on, my dad and mom became Christians. And Zelma and I used to go out and play, and we preached and we sang and did whatever. We made our own. We made our, like, pie plate maybe or something with a tambourine, and guitars, and so those types of things we grew up with and was happy. And we didn't have, and it didn't bother us that we didn't have it. A lot of stuff we didn't know that was out there because we never saw it. And so we grew up happy with our parents. And when we were born, my brothers were men. So my father was a good man. He had us when he had those grown men, sons, plus his other sons in Warm Springs. And so we was very fortunate. I say we were fortunate because there were just us around here. But when we had to go to town, sometimes we'd go to Tacoma because my mother was a Puyallup, and in certain times they'd get checks, and my dad would take her over there, and we would not turn my mother loose. We hung on to the side of her dress or the side of her coat. We was never out in big cities and stuff like that. But like I said, we were happy. We grew up, and like Zelma said, my dad was a proud man. But he was educated man, and he was put down for that.
Well, actually, in the history of the American History, the History of Museum in Washington D.C., he's listed there as an activist for your fishing rights, and which I think he obviously was a very colorful man. He had 3 wonderful wives, and he had 25. From what we hear, 21 or 25 children.
And he played in the band. He was a band player. He was musical. He played instruments, and his family from Warm Springs, they were musically inclined. The rest, us from this family, were not, but they were. But he was a musician. He got a good education. He went to Chemawa Indian School. He went to Haskell Institute, and he was very well educated. When I became chairman, because he worked for this tribe, he worked for a lot of the Indians. He helped them organize under Indian Reorganization Act. At that time, we were children, and there'd be native people from all over would come. He nailed boards to oak trees, and they'd be overflowing. They'd be sitting on the ground because he helped them. He helped them to organize, and he helped them with their fishing rights. And so he was well respected for that. And I became chairman. I had a brother that was chairman, a sister that was chairman, and I became chairman. When I was back to Washington, D.C., they let me go up to the archives and took me right up there, upstairs where all the boxes are kept. And I went through several boxes, and it really did something to my heart to read information, letters that he wrote back there on behalf of his people. He helped all the Indians. It wasn't just the Nisqually Indians, but it was all the Indians. And it was really interesting to see letters that he wrote on behalf of the Indians for fishing rights. If the Indian people back then got the help from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and had attorneys that would help them, there wouldn't have been a boat decision. Because my father, he kept alive. He filed an injunction against the state of Washington way back when we were kids for our fishing rights, and we used to go to meetings with what they called the steelheaders, were then called the Pokey Club, and he would go to their meetings, and we would go as kids, and there was no conflict with fishing with them then. They used to come here, and our father would let them go down and park their car by our house. They'd go down, walk over the hill to the river and fish. And there was no problems until after the Second World War. And then new people that came here to Fort Lewis, they liked the area, they liked the sport of fishing. Then we had problems with fishermen, the non-Indian fishermen fishing the river. And that's where conflict came in. And it was a big conflict.
Well, it's there's certainly between your grandfather, and your dad, they spanned a very interesting time of history, and for them to, you folks are here now. And did you know your other half brothers and sisters from the Warm Springs, and also from they say it was from the Cowlitz River?
Yes, we knew.
You know them?
Yeah, we were pretty well up in age. Still probably teenagers, and when we met some of our brothers from at Warm Springs, but we had a sister, Naomi, that used to travel this way. We had a sister named Esther that she moved this way. Also, the one other sister, Irene, they lived in this area, and especially Esther, she lived around close to us, to be close to her dad. But it wasn't till we were much older that we met our brother named Oliver. And years later, Francis had left Warm Springs and he moved down south. He was angry at his sisters and brothers for some reason. And he came here to Nisqually. When he came back, instead of going to Warm Springs, he came to Nisqually looking for my father. And that's the first time we met him. His name was Francis. And so we didn't get to spend much time with him because we lived here in Washington, Nisqually, and Warm Springs, Oregon was quite a ways away. You know, in those times, you didn't travel very far. Mm-hmm. You didn't have anything to travel with. My father always had some automobile, and so that, but you know, then sometimes it would break down and so forth. So we didn't travel very far, but we did go there, and we met him.
I think it is so interesting to hear because you know I was meeting with Cece White Wolf, and we were just kind of trying to calculate one day. We were just having a conversation, and we were trying to calculate how many descendants actually came from John and Peter. You know what we came up with? A guesstimate. Now this is a guesstimate. Mm-hmm. How much? 1,200 people.
Yeah,
So
I would believe that. Well, you know, to go back to what Zelda was saying about Esther and Irene, they moved here with my father, and my mother was their stepmother, and they're about the same age, but they took care of them two girls. They were the two youngest girls that lived with my mother and our father, Peter. So they were raised here. She took care of, you know, my mother was their stepmother. So they were raised here with my dad and my mother.
that is so ohana, isn't it? And whether it's Hawaiian or if it's Indian, same thing. Everybody just takes care of each other. Yeah, that's kind of the family creed.
Yeah.
You just do. Native people take care of their own. Now, I have a question, and that is, I was reading that a lot of the early pioneers of the Kanakas would host and have baby luau's. Did you folks do baby luau's?
No.
First baby luau's? No?
No.
Okay, because that's a real big thing in Hawaii. They have that, and as far as music, probably why as far as the music, because you folks are here living in Nisqually area. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much where you folks. I mean, because it says that the Fort Nisqually area, that the Kalamas actually owned a lot of that. Do you own any of this?
Not to my knowledge. Not out that area. This property here that my father inherited from his uncles Peter and Henry Martin is the property that we live on now. And they were moved from across Fort Lewis, where the original reservation was, and they really relocated the Indians on this side. Some of them, there wasn't enough land to go around. Some of them got sent to Quinault area, and some got sent over to Tulalip. Tulalip wasn't a reservation per se at that time. It was a lot of dispersed people that there wasn't enough land to go around, and the BIA brought land over in Tulalip, and that's how Tulalip became a reservation.
Well, you know, I don't want to be sharing anything that's political. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I will share just a thought and an opinion of mine, because we all have opinions. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that the area that they relocated you, and the same thing is with the Quinault and the Tulalip, were not in the high populated areas, and it's as though the properties that you were given,
nobody else wanted.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted. That's where they put us there, so we'd be off by ourselves, and the non-Indians would be over there in the good areas.
And you know, I mean, that's just an opinion. I mean, that's just
my opinion.
And I have noticed the same thing in Hawaii. The same thing. It's, you know, they have they're fighting for their land, and many of the homestead lands are clear as far away as you can possibly be. Nanakuli, Waianae, out in that area is where one of them. Waimanalo was on the other side too. The Big Island on Maui. It just seems kind of odd, doesn't it, that the Native people don't have the prime property.
Well, the prime property that was given to them years ago, when they found gold and they found other minerals on there, they took that land away from the natives and relocated them again. One good thing we're fortunate is we have this river. Our people are fisher people, and they did let us have this river. This land that where my house is now, it used to belong to non-Indians before they moved the reservation across the river. The people that owned it used to have a mill. They owned a mill, and they used to float logs down the river to get down to the bay area where they could load the logs on and ship them. That's where we're living today. There were houses on this land when they moved us across. My father and them across, and so there were houses here. They used to be. They had little cabins for their hired men that used to call it Shantytown because of those cabins that was there that was for the workers that lived there, and it was named Shantytown. So when the people would come up for the Knoll and the Squally to come up our area, they said, "Oh, we're going to Shantytown," because that name was stuck there because of the cabins that were there when the workers used to, when the mill was there. But after they got this land for the Indians, of course, the mill was no longer up and going. My father was farmed. He learned how to farm when he went to school, and he used to raise vegetables. He had a pretty good size area there where he raised berries, raspberries. He had tame gooseberries, and he raised vegetables. And I asked my mother, how could he raise vegetables when there was no running water there? She said he would get up early in the morning and he would work the dew into the ground. And that way, that's how he watered his garden. But because the water was farther away, there was a lot of water, but we never had running water on our reservation until the 60s. And it was almost the late 60s before we had electricity and running water. And this was due to late Julia Butler Hanson. That was one of the last things she did for reservations that didn't have electricity and water. And my mother never lived to see that. My mother was dead now before we ever got running water and electricity here on the reservation.
That's the other flip side of this wonderful celebration of John Kalama, isn't it? I just have been just totally amazed because I have traveled now to Warm Springs and over to the Quileutes and Quinault area, Tahola, and over here. And personally, I love the drives. I love being able to see the beautiful country and the areas we're at. But I just, it kind of doesn't settle with me very well when I see how far and how isolated you folks are to have to live. And this is you're part of the supposedly an Ali'i heritage on both sides. And certainly isn't the way the Ali'i of today should be living.
Well, yeah, I agree with you there. We didn't know that we were so, isolated. This was our home. And they didn't have all of these buildings homes close to us. But after a while, then as progress comes, you know what happens to progress. You see all these houses, and we got all these buildings. Now that belongs to the Nisquallies, but we didn't have it. It was a long time coming, and now we have it.
It's really kind of, because, you talked about how happy you folks were when you grew up because you didn't know. And, I think about a lot of the local Hawaiians who live in the out areas, and, they live a very idyllic life because it is wonderful. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get out of the rat race of the stress and all of that that goes with it, and it's always baffling to me, the warmth that you folks all have, and there has not been one time that I have gone anywhere in any of the Kalama family that I haven't been well received, and I really appreciate that because you folks have been so wonderful.
Well, we appreciate you folks too, because we're all like we all claim we're one big happy family, no matter from the Hawaiian side or the native side. Like I say, my father was a leader. My brother, in turn, one of my brothers became chairman. I had a sister before me that became chairman. Then I was elected chairman. This tribe didn't have anything. And I overheard another gentleman from another tribe telling someone, he said, as long as these little tribes don't know that there's money there. Now, this was in the 60s, early 60s. He said, as long as these little tribes don't know there's money there, there's more money for us. I overheard that conversation, and when they elected me chairman, I said, I'm going after some of that money for this tribe. And I did. I spent my own money, took time off, went to meetings, and was able to get funding here for us. I had to go through a lot through these bigger reservations that didn't want us to be able to get this funding, but we got it, and we were able to hire people to work. We were able to buy some of our land back. We were able to get housing. We were able to get health care, education, and I would do it all over again. It's a lot of hard work, many trips back to Washington, D.C., having to walk the halls, of your legs would be so, and feet so tired walking the sidewalks and going down those halls, talking to the people in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, talking to the people on the Hill, and talking to people down in the BIA office. It was a lot of hard work, but I would do it over again.
And it's interesting because, Zelma, you know what that means. You've been definitely carrying your father's and your grandfather's genes in you, and that they were always spokespeople for their people. Well, we were talking about the rich heritage of your both cultures, the Hawaiian and the Native American. I think this is so fabulous. Should I call it Native American or Indian?
Well, we call it Indian.
Great.
I'm saying Indian, not Native American.
Great, because I'll call it Indian also. Well, one thing that I've noticed, and as I've done my research, is that years ago when we first met, you had told me to go and visit Fort Nisqually, and so I went. And when I arrived there, it wasn't until Mike McGuire was sharing with me. He's the curator there, and I said, "Well, I'm really doing a research about the Kalama family and the Kanakas who first arrived here." And I said, I would like anything. I mean, because I was not finding very much. And he took me into this little office, which was the museum's office at the time, tiny little office. And he was filing through some of his files. And he was pulling out one thing after another. And then suddenly he looked at me and said, "Well, John Kalama helped build this house." And I just had chicken skin because I suddenly looked around. And he showed me the different places that he would have possibly had his hands on, and it was just so wonderful. And that's where we had that interview with you to finish the Kanaka project about the Kanakas in coming to the King County area, and I think when we saw it, it had not been renovated. It has now been renovated, and that house was in fact your grandfather helped to produce or invent an equipment, a piece of equipment that helped making the lumber, the planing of the lumber easier. And it stands there on the grounds of Fort Nisqually. So not only did he help build the house of the Dr. Tolmes, he also worked on invented that new equipment that today they've got fancier ones like that now, but he helped with that. So that was your grandfather, and your richness of cultures of what your father did. He did a lot in this area, and not to take away from anybody else and none of the other Kanakas, but it was just very symbolic of what he did here. And sometimes history doesn't go back. And at that time, I know that John or Peter were not recognized. And same as with you, for the hard work that you've done, to make sure that your people receive what is due to them. But the celebration of the Kalama, the celebration that's happening in the city of Kalama, it's 175th anniversary, is when they believe that John arrived from Kula here and made his home here. That wasn't the only place he lived, because he did travel and lived in different places because of work situation, but he did settle there, and he became quite a fisherman and a farmer. He was also a sheep herder and did a lot of farming as well. So it's just amazing that the city of Kalama is actually going to be doing a festival. This festival is going to honor the contributions of the Native Americans, Indians, as well as the Hawaiians, and their contributions here in the Northwest. Now, I am really thrilled to be able to be a part of this project, because I probably have learned more and appreciate more the cultures of the Indians and the Hawaiians, and how many of it was so blended. And although that there was some rifts in the way their cultures may have had to, for survival, have had their own cultural clashes, it is so fabulous to see them come full circle to what it was like when John first arrived. From what I understand in the history books, when John arrived, he was extremely well received. He played music. The cultures just embraced him. And I just believe that that's the way it was intended. But because of survival, because of work, because of political arenas at the time, there were some different factions that went on. And I think it's just really fabulous. I want to know how you folks feel about all of this.
Well, I'm proud of John, what he did. I read some information that I got from one of our elders, and read up about what he did. That he was talented when he was at Hudson Bay. That when they needed something done, and this is what I read, they called on John, that he could fix whatever it was that needed to be fixed, and whether it was machinery, something in a building, that's who they would call. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of my dad.
I'm proud of the legacy of John Kalama. I'm proud to be a descendant of John Kalama and Peter Kalama. I treasure that. We were part from the Hawaiian and part from the Indians. I'm very proud of that legacy, that we stem from both sides.
You're a very unique family because of that. And I know that you're also proud of the descendants of Chief Self, because also through Mary Martin,
Yes.
you have that richness of both of the cultures, and you've kept it alive.
Well, I'm fortunate that we had this behind us. This happened before our time, and that I'm glad that I'm here, sitting with you, talking about it. I'm happy.
I would love to find out more about Mary Martin and Chief South, and I know that there's been some history behind that too, and I know that you folks know more about it than I do.
Well, I'm proud to be part of this celebration that's going to go on for the 175 years commemorating John Kalama. I'm proud of it, and I'm glad that I'm alive to see this. I'm glad that I have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that's going to benefit from this, and they will know their heritage. And I'm glad this is coming about in my lifetime.
I am Napua, and I really, really have been thankful that we've had Zelma and Zelda here to share with you folks their perspective of their father, Peter Kalama. And Zelda and Zelma are the granddaughters of John Kalama, who arrived 175 years ago this year.
There's only one sister and our brother that are left alive of grandchildren of John Kalama, of grandchildren, the people in the relatives in Hawaii would be great grandchildren of Peter and John Kalama. I mean, in Warm Springs, yeah. So, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of my heritage.
And I'm so glad that you were here and still spunky as ever. Mahalo from all of us. Hui ho.